Welcome to the Deep Dive, the show where we really try to unearth those fascinating truths hidden, well, often right in plain sight. Today, we're plunging into a topic that honestly resonates with a really fundamental, almost primal human desire: control. Just think about it for a second. That deep kind of visceral aversion we all have to feeling utterly helpless. Have you ever felt that? That gnawing frustration, that profound powerlessness. Maybe you're navigating a big corporate meeting where your ideas just seem to vanish. Or maybe just trying to handle a tricky social situation where you feel completely unheard. Really makes you wonder, doesn't it? What if the modern world, despite its shiny veneer of fairness, democracy, equality, what if it's still, really, at its core, a game of power? So today's mission, if you choose to embark on it with us, is to peel back those layers. We want to explore the timeless and, often uncomfortable truths about power dynamics. We're going to do a deep dive into the preface of a really foundational text here, the 48 Laws of Power. Now, before you jump to conclusions, let's be crystal clear. This isn't some simple how-to guide for manipulation, okay? It's not an endorsement of ruthless behavior either. Instead, what our source material does is act as this incredibly rich distillation of observations, ones gleaned from thousands of years of human interaction. It draws wisdom from, well, ancient strategists who shaped empires, cunning Renaissance courtiers navigating treacherous politics, and even master con artists who really understood the subtle levers of human psychology. Think of it maybe as a meticulously curated shortcut to being truly well-informed. A way to understand the hidden forces, those subtle currents that are constantly at play in our daily lives, often just beneath the surface of polite interaction. Our explicit goal today is really to equip you, our curious listener, with a clear-eyed, unvarnished perspective on power. It's not necessarily about you actively wielding it in every situation. It's more about developing that sharp ability to recognize these dynamics when they inevitably unfold around you. And this knowledge, well, it can be transformative, whether it's in your workplace, your social circles, or even within the intricate fabric of your own personal interactions. It's about moving beyond naivety.
Gaining a more sophisticated understanding of what is, let's face it, a fundamentally complex world. I'm genuinely excited about this deep dive because it challenges so much of what we think we know about human behavior. It reveals these surprising patterns that are somehow ancient, but also utterly contemporary. This deep dive, I think, will offer a fresh, often counterintuitive perspective, making what could be incredibly dense or even like taboo topics accessible, engaging, and hopefully profoundly insightful.
And that's exactly why this material is so relevant, isn't it? It really acts as this powerful lens. It forces us to look beyond the superficial appearances, past the pleasantries, the stated intentions, the carefully crafted public images, to really understand the underlying motivations driving actions, both our own and those of others. What's truly fascinating, I think, is how these historical observations connect so directly, so undeniably to contemporary life. They reveal that despite all our tech advancements and societal shifts, some fundamental aspects of human interaction, especially those around influence and control, they remain. Well, exactly the same. We're going to see just how deeply rooted this pursuit of power truly is in the human psyche.
That's a perfect way to frame it. So let's start by unpacking what the source presents as this initial, almost primal paradox of power. Because really, everything else flows from here. Our source material opens with this profound, almost uncomfortable truth. The feeling of having no power over people and events is generally unbearable to us. When we feel helpless, we feel miserable. And the inverse, it argues, is also true, almost like an axiom. No one wants less power, everyone wants more. Now, when we hear power, we often immediately jump to negative things, don't we? Like tyranny, oppression, that sort of thing. But this isn't necessarily sinister desire in its raw form, is it?
No, not at all. What's really insightful here is that it's not presented as some morally corrupt ambition or, some dark psychological issue. It's framed more as a fundamental inherent human drive for agency, for control. Think about it. Our psychological comfort, our sense of security, even our desperate avoidance of misery, they're all deeply tied to our perceived ability to influence our environment and, crucially, our own lives. If you consistently feel like just a pawn, totally at the mercy of external forces, or if your efforts seem to have zero impact, that is, quite frankly, a recipe for profound unhappiness. So this desire for power in its most elemental form isn't about crushing others. It's fundamentally about security, about influence over your circumstances, about personal efficacy, that actual deep human needs to navigate the world effectively, to feel like you have a hand on the steering wheel of your own life. It's the basis of feeling competent, feeling secure.
That really reframes it. Makes it much more intuitive, yeah. We all crave some degree of control, don't we? Imagine, just for a moment, being on a project team where your great ideas are constantly dismissed, or maybe subtly undermined. Or find yourself in a tricky personal situation, maybe a difficult family dynamic where you feel completely unheard, your concerns just brushed aside. That constant lack of agency, that feeling of powerlessness. It really is unbearable. It's not about wanting to be a tyrant. It's about having your voice, your contributions, your will actually matter in the world. But then we immediately hit the contemporary dilemma. And this is where the observations in our source become not just interesting, but truly deeply insightful. Because while everyone arguably desires more power, the book points out this peculiar modern paradox. It is dangerous to seem too power-hungry, to be overt with your power moves. We have to seem fair and decent. This societal expectation, the source argues, leads to this need for incredible subtlety, for being, and I love this phrase, congenial yet cunning, democratic yet devious.
This is a critical observation. It's
Yeah.
almost a societal double bind that feels like it's intensified recently. We live in societies that, outwardly at least, champion ideals like equality, collaboration, a certain kind of humility. You hear the buzzwords everywhere, right? Team player, servant leadership, synergy. They dominate corporate language. And overt ambition or aggressive displays of dominance, they're often met with suspicion, if not outright disapproval. Yet, underneath that carefully polished surface, the competitive drive for promotions, for recognition, for limited resources, for overall influence, it still thrives, often more fiercely than ever. This inherent societal pressure to appear good or fair creates this fascinating complex tension with the underlying reality of competition. And the really fascinating insight isn't just that the tension exists, but that it forces us into this paradoxical performance. We're not just being good, we're performing goodness. While internally, or sometimes very subtly, we're strategizing for influence. It's a layer of complexity that perhaps previous eras with more overt power structures, a king was simply a king, didn't really require. It transforms basic human ambition into this art form of subtle camouflage.
Yeah.
And those who master it, they gain an almost invisible edge. Think about the carefully curated image of a modern politician or a CEO. Every statement, every donation, every appearance of humility is meticulously designed to project an image that often masks the ruthless strategic thinking happening behind closed doors.
That's a really powerful point. This complex dynamic, this need for subtlety, brings us right to what the source identifies as the perfect historical parallel. The setting that most profoundly resembles our modern world, the old aristocratic court. Okay, let's really unpack this, because life in these courts sounds like a permanent, precarious tightrope walk, doesn't it? The courtiers found themselves in an especially delicate position. They had to serve their masters, kings, queens, the powerful elite. But, and this is the crucial bit, if they seemed to fawn, if they curried favor too obviously, their sharp-eyed rivals would immediately spot it and act against them, see it as a threat.
Exactly. The source uses incredibly vivid language, describing it as a scheming world. Every glance, every whispered word, every perceived slight could spell disaster. Courtiers were under constant, intense scrutiny from everyone. Any attempt to win the master's favor had to be done with exquisite subtlety, almost invisibly. And more than that, even the most skilled and favored ones had to constantly protect themselves, often from their closest peers, who were always scheming to push them aside. It was an environment where outward appearances meant absolutely everything. It was a performance. Yet underneath that polished exterior, a constant, often brutal battle for position and influence raged. Imagine climbing a corporate ladder where every step up means someone else is actively plotting your downfall, and you have to smile and shake their hand knowing it.
And here's the paradox within that paradox, making it even more fascinating. The court was supposedly the height of civilization and refinement. Direct, violent, or overtly aggressive power moves weren't just discouraged, they were actively frowned upon. Courtiers would actually work silently and secretly against any among them who used force. Not out of morality necessarily, but because that kind of bluntness disrupted the delicate balance and exposed the underlying game. This created what the source calls the courtier's dilemma. They had to appear as the very paragon of elegance, radiating grace and sophistication. Yet at the same time, they needed to outwit and thwart their own opponents in the subtlest of ways. The image given is chillingly precise, memorable too, stabbing an opponent with a velvet glove on his hand and the sweetest of smiles on his face. It's not about raw power, it's about the art of its concealment.
It's a striking image, isn't it? And so enduring. This wasn't just about avoiding direct fights. It was about replacing them with this continuous, almost dance-like game that demanded constant vigilance and tactical thinking. Direct force was seen as crude, barbaric even. It was strategically replaced by indirect methods. Seduction, charm, deception, and subtle strategy, always planning several moves ahead. It was, essentially, civilized war, a psychological battlefield where the best weapons were discretion and foresight. This historical context provides such a powerful lens for looking at today's interactions. When we think about this, we have to ask, how does this ancient court still echo in our modern meeting rooms, our social media fights, even our political campaigns? It suggests the underlying human drivers haven't really changed in millennia. Only the acceptable and effective methods for pursuing power have evolved, demanding greater finesse, more indirectness.
And this leads us to some remarkably blunt wisdom from history's most pragmatic minds, figures who really understood the raw mechanics of power. Niccolo Machiavelli, the great Renaissance diplomat and political theorist, famously wrote in The Prince, and this is stark, "Any man who tries to be good all the time is bound to come to ruin among the great number who are not good." Brutal assessment of reality, right? And then you have Napoleon Bonaparte, the ultimate strategist who advised, "Place your iron hand inside a velvet glove." These aren't exactly feel-good quotes for motivational posters, are they?
No, definitely not. But what's fascinating here is how Machiavelli's observation isn't really a call to be immoral or cynical. It's more a profoundly pragmatic assessment of the world. He's not saying be evil. He's warning against being naive in a world where, frankly, not everyone plays by the same rules or has good intentions. If we connect this to the bigger picture, it suggests this profound, often uncomfortable tension between our cherished ideals and the effective action needed to navigate the real world successfully. The iron hand in Napoleon's advice. That signifies core strength, resolve, the capacity to act decisively when you need to. The velvet glove, though, represents that necessary outward appearance of grace, subtlety, geniality. It's about knowing exactly when and how to be firm without ever appearing harsh or aggressive. It ensures your influence is felt without triggering that overt resistance or resentment. It's all about strategic presentation, enabling your underlying strength.
So the ultimate outcome, if someone can truly master these intricate arts of indirection, it's genuinely transformative. The source tells us you'll be able to make people bend to your will without their realizing what you've done. And here's the absolutely crucial part, the key to why it works. If they don't realize what you've done, they will neither resent nor resist you. I mean, wow. Just consider the implications of that for a moment. As you, the listener, process this idea of influence without overt friction, how might understanding this dynamic change your perception of effective leadership or successful negotiation, or even just everyday persuasion? It moves beyond simple persuasion to a kind of almost undetectable guidance.
It really points to a level of mastery where influence becomes almost seamless, like a natural extension of your presence. It's not about obvious force or even obvious argument. It's about subtly guiding outcomes so the other person genuinely feels they arrived at the decision or the course of action themselves. And that's incredibly powerful because it bypasses that natural human tendency to resist coercion or manipulation. When someone feels they've chosen something, even if they were subtly guided, they own that decision. And that ownership leads to much greater compliance and way less resentment down the line. Imagine negotiating a complex deal where the other side walks away feeling they got exactly what they wanted, never realizing they were gently steered towards your optimal outcome. That's the power of the velvet glove.
Which brings us to a really uncomfortable but absolutely critical point in our deep dive, the myth of opting out. The source directly tackles this idea that some people genuinely believe they can just step out of these power games altogether by behaving in ways that have nothing to do with power, often labeling such games as evil, asocial, a relic of the past. You hear people say things like, "Oh, I'm just here to do good work," or "I'm above office politics." But then comes a very stark warning.
And it's a warning we really need to pay attention to. You must beware of such people, for while they express such opinions outwardly, they're often among the most adept players at power. End quote. The material states, quite unequivocally, that these non-players, the ones who publicly disavow the game, actually use strategies that cleverly disguise the nature of the manipulation involved. It implies that even the desire to be above or outside power can itself be a very potent and often highly effective power play. It makes them extremely dangerous opponents precisely because their motives are hidden behind this veil of moral superiority.
So they're not opting out at all. They're just playing a different game, often a more deceptive one. The source goes into several fascinating examples of these disguised power strategies, and they really turn our conventional understanding on its head. First up, displaying weakness as virtue. It explains how some people cleverly flaunt their weakness or perceive lack of power as a moral virtue to gain sympathy, maybe elicit help, or accrue respect. It even references Law 22, the surrender tactic.
The analysis here is quite sharp and definitely counterintuitive. True powerlessness, without any motive of self-interest, would not publicize its weakness. So this implies that the public display of vulnerability, when done strategically, is actually a very effective strategy, subtle and deceptive. Consider someone who consistently portrays themselves as overwhelmed or incapable in a team setting. They might publicly complain about their lack of resources or limited experience, not out of genuine despair, perhaps, but to subtly shift their workload onto others, or to generate protective alliances, or even just to avoid blame if a project fails. They might say, "Oh, I'm just so bad with numbers," when really they're strategically getting rid of a task they don't want. Or think of a political figure emphasizing their humble beginnings, their supposed lack of privilege, to gain popular support. Not because they're genuinely without influence now, but because it's a powerful tool to rally empathy and votes. As you, the listener, reflect on this, can you recall examples where public displays of vulnerability, maybe even from people who seemed genuinely weak, actually garnered unexpected influence or shifted how others acted?
That's a powerful thought. Makes us rethink situations we've probably just dismissed as simple helplessness before. Okay, another strategy attributed to the supposed non-players is demanding equality. The source details this strategy of demanding equality in every area of life where everyone must be treated alike, whatever their status and strength. Now this sounds inherently positive, doesn't it? Fair.
It does, on the surface, absolutely. But here's where the source offers a crucial and, yeah, often uncomfortable counterpoint. But to avoid the taint of power, you attempt to treat everyone equally and fairly. You will confront the problem that some people do certain things better than others. The inherent problem, as it's presented, is that treating everyone equally means ignoring their differences, elevating the less skillful, and suppressing those who excel. And this isn't just framed as inefficiency, it's then categorized not as pure altruism, but as another power strategy, redistributing people's rewards in a way that they determine. This raises a really important, provocative question. Is the pursuit of equality always what it seems? Is it always driven purely by fairness? Or can it sometimes be a masked mechanism for control, reshaping the playing field to one's own advantage, perhaps by leveling down those who genuinely outperform, or by making sure a particular group's preferences become the universal standard? It's not about whether equality itself is good or bad, but about recognizing when the demand for equality is, in fact, a strategic move.
That's a huge pivot. Makes us fundamentally rethink something we often just assume is inherently good. And then there's the strategy of perfect honesty and straightforwardness. On the surface, this seems like the total opposite of deceit, which power seekers often use. Yet the source argues that being perfectly honest, constantly speaking your unfiltered truth, will inevitably hurt and insult a great many people, which leads directly to retaliation and, ironically, a reduction of your own influence.
Exactly. And furthermore, an honest statement, especially one that's pointed or critical, is rarely seen by the recipient as completely objective and free of some personal motivation. People naturally look for the why. In fact, the source contends that the use of honesty is indeed a power strategy, intended to convince people of one's noble, good-hearted, selfless character. It's depicted as a form of persuasion, even a subtle form of coercion. Think about the person who insists on telling it like it is, often causing offense, but simultaneously builds this reputation for integrity that, in turn, grants them significant influence. Their honesty becomes a brand, right? A tool to disarm suspicion and make others trust what they say without question. They might even use honesty as a kind of shield to deliver harsh judgments, knowing that the very act of being honest gives them a certain immunity from criticism.
This is truly turning our common understanding of virtue completely on its head. And speaking of appearances, the last disguise strategy discussed is affecting naivete. Some individuals cleverly adopt an air of naivete to avoid accusations of seeking power, maybe to seem harmless. It even references Law 21, seem dumber than your mark.
Precisely. The source emphasizes that the appearance of naivete can be an effective means of deceit. It's like wearing a mask of harmlessness that lets you operate unnoticed, gather information, or set traps without anyone suspecting a thing. It goes even further, stating that even genuine naivete is not free of the snares of power, using children as a pretty compelling example. Children, it notes, despite their perceived innocence, often act from an elemental need to gain control, precisely because they suffer from feeling powerless. They cry for attention, manipulate with tears, maybe play one parent against the other, all to get what they want. And here's the truly startling insight for adults. Genuinely innocent people may still be playing for power and are often horribly effective at the game since they are not hindered by reflection. They act on pure instinct, unburdened by self-consciousness or moral hang-ups, or the overthinking that might slow down a more seasoned, self-aware player. Their lack of pretense can make their manipulative actions surprisingly potent. The source wraps this point up by noting that those who make a show or display of innocence are the least innocent of all, implying it's usually a calculated choice.
It's a complete reframe of how we often perceive innocence and vulnerability. Wow. So if we pull all this together, the reality presented is stark. All of us hunger for power, and almost all of our actions are aimed at gaining it. These non-players, then, they aren't really opting out, they're merely throwing dust in our eyes, distracting us from their own plays with their air of moral superiority. The source urges us to watch them closely, and we'll apparently see that they're often the ones most skillful at indirect manipulation, even if some of them practice it unconsciously. And, tellingly, they greatly resent any publicizing of the tactics they use every day, presumably because it exposes their hidden game.
It's presented as an inescapable reality, a fundamental truth about how humans interact. The core idea is that if the world is like a giant scheming court and we are trapped inside it, there is no use in trying to opt out of the game. Why? Because that just renders you powerless, and powerlessness will make you miserable. So instead of futilely struggling against this reality or arguing against it or feeling guilty about it, the source argues it's far better to excel at power. And this connects directly to the idea that knowledge is most valuable when it's understood and applied. It's not really about advocating for manipulation for its own sake. It's about recognizing its pervasive presence and choosing to navigate it skillfully, effectively, rather than blindly stumbling through and becoming its victim. It's about self-preservation and effectiveness in a complex world.
And here's the unexpected, almost counterintuitive benefit the source claims comes from this mastery. The better you are at dealing with power, the better friend, lover, husband, wife, and person you become. It suggests that by following the route to the perfect courtier, Law 24, which involves mastering these indirect arts, you actually learn to make others feel better about themselves. You become a genuine source of pleasure and satisfaction for them. They will, in turn, grow dependent on your abilities and desirous of your presence. And crucially, mastering these laws spares others the pain that comes from bungling with power by playing with fire without knowing its properties. The ultimate conclusion is this provocative call to action. If the game of power is inescapable, better to be an artist than a denier or a bungler.
It frames mastery not just as self-serving, but actually as a path to creating smoother, more effective, and maybe even more harmonious interactions. It reduces unnecessary friction, misunderstanding, and the pain caused by clumsy, amateurish attempts at influence. Think about it. A bungler in power dynamics might inadvertently offend someone or betray trust or alienate people through their sheer lack of skill, creating chaos and resentment. An artist, by contrast, achieves their aims with finesse, leaving others feeling respected, understood, maybe even grateful, all while subtly guiding the outcome. It's a pragmatic argument for skill rather than a moralistic one, framing skill as a benefit not just to yourself, but also to those around you who no longer have to suffer through your awkward attempts at influence.
Okay, so if we're aiming to become artists rather than bunglers in this complex game, what's in our essential toolkit? The source outlines some crucial skills, starting with what it calls power's crucial foundation, and also the single greatest barrier to power, mastering your emotions. It states plainly that an emotional response, especially an uncontrolled one, clouds reason. It fundamentally prevents clear assessment and effective control of any situation.
This is deeply insightful. Emotions, while totally natural, are presented here as formidable obstacles to strategic thinking. Anger, for instance, is called the most destructive of emotional responses, for it clouds your vision the most. It's like this fog rolling in on your strategic battlefield, making it impossible to see the terrain or your opponent clearly. Plus, it has this ripple effect that invariably makes situations less controllable and heightens your enemy's resolve. When you show anger, you give your opponent clarity, you fuel their motivation, and often you empower them by showing your vulnerability. The tactical alternative offered is chillingly practical. If you are trying to destroy an enemy who has hurt you, far better to keep him off guard by feigning friendliness than showing your anger. This fits perfectly with wisdom from figures like the Indian philosopher Kautilya, who compares subtle strategy to an arrow shot by a skilled archer hitting its mark silently, versus the brute force of an untrained warrior just flailing around. Similarly, Goethe observed that cunning is best applied by seeming to be a clumsy fool. It's all about not letting your feelings reveal your true intentions.
And it's not just anger that the source warns about. It also flags love and affection as potentially problematic. It notes they are also potentially destructive in that they blind you to the often self-serving interests of those whom you least suspect of playing a power game. The advice isn't to become some cold, unfeeling robot, to repress feelings entirely, but rather to be incredibly careful how you express them. And most importantly, they should never influence your plans and strategies in any way. So the goal isn't emotionlessness, but rather a profound detachment from emotional influence when it comes to strategic decisions, right? It's about keeping a clear head.
Exactly. It's about maintaining that clear, rational mind, unclouded by the immediate pull of emotion, which can lead to rash decisions, poor judgment, or, crucially, misjudging others' true intentions. For example, if you're deeply fond of a colleague, you might be tempted to overlook their subtle attempts to undermine your project, maybe attributing their actions to benign motives just because you like them. Or, in a romantic relationship, strong emotional attachment could lead you to ignore warning signs about a partner's self-serving behaviors. The objective here is to make sure your plans and strategies are always dictated by logic and foresight, not by temporary emotional states, no matter how pleasant or unpleasant they might feel.
Speaking of clear thinking, the second essential skill in this toolkit is objective thinking. It's described as the ability to distance yourself from the present moment and think objectively about the past and future. Much like Janus, the two-faced Roman god. One face looks constantly to the future with the motto, "No days unalert." This means nothing should ever catch you by surprise because you're constantly imagining potential problems, meticulously calculating every possible permutation and pitfall before they even have a chance to arise.
This is a direct contrast to just, fantasizing about a happy ending or hoping for the best. The source states quite clearly, the further you see, the more steps ahead you plan, the more powerful you become. It's about cultivating this mindset of proactive problem solving and foresight rather than just reactive crisis management. Imagine a chess grandmaster. They're not just planning their next move, but anticipating their opponent's next 3 or 4 responses. This level of foresight lets you prepare for contingencies, set traps, avoid being caught off guard. It transforms potential setbacks into opportunities simply because you've already thought about them. This predictive thinking means you can adjust your strategy or deploy countermeasures before a threat even fully appears.
And what about the backward-glancing eye of Janus? That's not for dwelling on past hurts or holding grudges. The source explicitly says it just curbs your power, binds you to the past. Instead, it's about educating yourself constantly, learning from those who came before you, studying history, biography, the strategies of past masters. But the most vital school, the source tells us, is examining your own past mistakes, analyzing them meticulously through the lens of the 48 laws, and making a solemn oath to yourself. I shall never repeat such a mistake. I shall never fall into such a trap again.
This deeply introspective self-evaluation is absolutely key. It's key to breaking free from those patterns of the past, an immensely valuable skill that stops you from repeating harmful behaviors or falling into predictable traps. It's about iterative improvement, learning from experience, not just intellectually, but at a fundamental behavioral level. Think of it like refining your internal operating system based on real-world feedback. By dissecting your failures, understanding why they happen within this framework of power dynamics, you develop this invaluable intuition that guides your future actions. It lets you sidestep pitfalls that would catch the less reflective person.
Okay, the third crucial skill in this power toolkit, playing with appearances, or what the source unapologetically calls the art of deception. Power, it states, requires the profound ability to play with appearances, to wear many masks and keep a bag full of deceptive tricks. Now, here's where it gets ethically thorny for a lot of people, as the source states unequivocally that deception and masquerade should not be seen as ugly or immoral.
The argument presented is purely pragmatic, totally divorced from conventional morality. It says all human interaction requires deception on many levels, and the very ability to lie is seen as something that separates humans from animals, suggesting it's a marker of sophisticated cognitive ability. It's definitely an amoral view. It cites examples from ancient Greek myths, India's Mahabharata, the Epic of Gilgamesh, where even gods use deceptive arts, and great men like Odysseus are revered not just for strength, but for their craftiness. Deception, therefore, is framed not as a flaw, but as a developed art of civilization and the most potent weapon in the game of power. It's the ability to control perception, which, in the realm of power, is often way more important than objective reality.
So for practical application, the source suggests success in power requires a certain distanced approach to yourself, being able to inhabit many different people, wearing whatever mask the moment calls for. This flexibility, the source argues, actually loses a lot of the inward heaviness that holds people down, that burden of maintaining just one rigid identity. You practice concealing your true intentions, subtly luring people into traps, or redirecting their focus. Playing with appearances is presented not just as a tactic, but as an aesthetic pleasure in itself, and a key component in acquiring and keeping power. So what does this all mean for us, the listeners? It's not about becoming, a fake or a charlatan in a negative sense. It's more about understanding that presentation is power, and that how you're perceived is often the crucial factor in how you're treated and how much influence you wield, regardless of your internal integrity.
It's a pragmatic acknowledgement that people operate overwhelmingly on perceptions. Therefore, controlling those perceptions is a profoundly powerful lever. The emphasis on aesthetic pleasure isn't just thrown in there. It suggests that for the master player, this isn't some burdensome act of dishonesty, but a sophisticated art form to be enjoyed. It's about becoming a master actor on the stage of life, always aware of your audience and the role you need to play at that moment. Think of a brilliant speaker who knows exactly which tone, which gesture, which carefully chosen story will sway their audience, even if it's a calculated performance, rather than a spontaneous overflow of feeling. That's the art of playing with appearances.
And finally, if deception is presented as the potent weapon in your arsenal, then patience is described as the crucial shield. It's the one quality that protects you from moronic blunders, from those rash, ill-considered moves that could undo all your careful planning. Like emotional mastery, patience is emphatically stated as a learned skill. It does not come naturally.
The source explains why this skill is so unnatural. It states that nothing about power is natural. Power is more godlike than anything in the natural world. And patience, it says, is the supreme virtue of the gods who have nothing but time. That analogy is key. Gods can wait centuries for plans to unfold. The outcome for the patient person, therefore, is that everything good will happen. The grass will grow again if you give it time and see several steps into the future. Impatience, on the other hand, is framed as a critical weakness. It only makes you look weak and is described as a principal impediment to power. It's all about the long game, about strategic endurance over short-term wins. Imagine a diplomat negotiating a complex treaty. Impatience leads to concessions, whereas prolonged, calm engagement, maybe even over years, can yield the desired outcome. Or a general waiting for the perfect moment to strike, even if it means enduring a long siege.
This brings us to one of the most provocative statements in the entire preface, a core idea of the philosophy presented. Power is fundamentally amoral. The source repeats that power is essentially amoral, and that a crucial skill is the ability to see circumstances rather than good or evil. It emphasizes this cannot be repeated too often. In games, power is definitely presented as a game. You don't judge opponents by their intentions, but by the effect of their actions.
The crucial insight here is that intentions, while often well-meaning, frequently cloud and deceive. What does it ultimately matter, the source asks, if good intentions lead to ruin and confusion? The road to hell, right? Paved with good intentions. People, it notes, cover up their actions with all kinds of justifications, almost always claiming goodness or altruism or high moral ground. The advice given is striking in its pragmatism. You must inwardly laugh each time you hear this and never get caught up engaging someone's intentions and actions through a set of moral judgments that are really an excuse for the accumulation of power. This perspective encourages a ruthless kind of critical thinking, asking not just what was done, but what was the outcome, and why was that outcome significant from a power perspective. It's a call to strip away the moral gloss and see the underlying mechanics of influence and control, focusing only on observable effects.
It's the ultimate chessboard mentality, isn't it? The source advises you to see all interactions like a strategic game. Your opponent sits opposite you. Both of you behave as gentlemen or ladies, observing the rules of the game and taking nothing personally. You play with strategy, planning your moves, and you watch your opponent's moves with as much calmness as you can muster. Ultimately, the source argues you'll appreciate their politeness and their sticking to the rules more than their good and sweet intentions. Your training, therefore, must be to train your eye to follow the results of their moves, the outward circumstances, and critically, do not be distracted by anything else.
This is about dispassionate observation and unwavering strategic focus. It's about detaching from emotional engagement with the players and instead analyzing their moves and consequences as purely tactical data. Think about a corporate takeover bid. A CEO might present their actions as beneficial for shareholder value or synergy, but the astute observer will see the underlying power consolidation, the elimination of rivals, the acquisition of resources. The good intentions might just be window dressing for a calculated strategic move. This perspective encourages a relentless focus on what is rather than what should be or what is claimed to be.
And then there's the often overlooked cost of action. A point made powerfully with a quote from the philosopher Friedrich Nietzsche. The source argues that half of power mastery comes not from what you do, but from what you do not do, which you do not allow yourself to get dragged into. Nietzsche wrote, "The value of a thing sometimes lies not in what one attains with it, but in what one pays for it, what it costs us." Okay, this is where it gets truly profoundly interesting because it forces us to reevaluate our priorities and really consider the true cost of our choices, not just the potential benefits.
And you're advised to apply this demanding standard to everything, including supposedly noble acts like collaborating or helping others. The source emphasizes that life is inherently short, opportunities are few, and our personal energy is limited. Time, in this framework, is as critical a resource as any other, maybe even more so. The blunt, almost shocking advice is never waste valuable time or mental peace of mind on the affairs of others. That is too high a price to pay. It's a stark reminder of personal resource management in the context of power, advocating for a self-protective calculation that prioritizes your own path and well-being over getting tangled up in others' struggles, especially if those struggles distract from your own strategic goals. It's not really a call to callousness, but a pragmatic recognition that your resources are finite.
Moving on, the source stresses that power is a social game. To learn and master it, you must develop the profound ability to study and understand people. It quotes Baltasar Gracian, that astute 17th century Spanish Jesuit philosopher, who wisely observed, "Many people spend time studying the properties of animals or herbs. How much more important it would be to study those of people with whom we must live or die. To be a master player in this game, you must therefore be a master psychologist, capable of recognizing underlying motivations and, crucially, seeing through the cloud of dust with which people surround their actions."
This takes us right to the immense value of understanding hidden motives. The source asserts that understanding people's hidden motives is the single greatest piece of knowledge you can have in acquiring power. Why is this so critical? Because this knowledge opens up endless possibilities of deception, seduction, and manipulation and integral. When you know what truly drives someone, their insecurities, their secret desires, their deep-seated fears, you gain an unparalleled advantage. You can craft messages that resonate deeply, design incentives that are irresistible, or orchestrate events that play perfectly into their unconscious biases. This raises an important question for all of us, though. How do we balance this necessary caution and observation with the genuine human need to build meaningful, trusting relationships? It's not about descending into paranoia, I think, but about maintaining a realistic assessment of human self-interest and understanding the full, often complex, range of motivations that guide even our closest relationships.
And the education the source emphasizes never stops. People are of infinite complexity. You could spend a lifetime watching them and never fully understand every nuance. Therefore, it's crucial to begin your education now, to cultivate this observational skill immediately. And a particularly challenging principle of trust is given. Never discriminate as to whom you study and whom you trust. Never trust anyone completely and study everyone, including friends and loved ones. This is truly a cold, calculated approach to human interaction, isn't it? It strips away so many of our conventional assumptions about personal relationships.
It is, but it underscores the constant vigilance and pragmatic realism the source advocates throughout. It's a stance that assumes everyone, regardless of their relationship to you, is operating from some underlying self-interest that needs to be understood. This isn't necessarily cynical, though. It's more a recognition of universal human nature. Even a friend, acting out of genuine affection, might inadvertently give you bad advice because their own biases or limited perspective cloud their judgment. A master psychologist would understand those underlying biases, not necessarily to exploit them, but to account for them in their own strategic thinking. It's about being perpetually aware of that intricate web of human motivations.
Which brings us back full circle to the core theme that runs through the entire preface. You must learn always to take the indirect route to power. The analogy used is incredibly vivid and precise, that of a billiard ball. Like a billiard ball that carums several times before it hits its target, your moves must be planned and developed in the least obvious way. It's about setting up a sequence of events, a chain reaction, rather than just hitting your objective head-on.
And the modern application of this is strikingly clear. By diligently training yourself to be indirect, you can not only survive, but truly thrive in the modern court, appearing outwardly as the paragon of decency while being the consummate manipulator. It's about achieving your aims and exerting your influence without ever triggering resistance or resentment, because your actions are so subtly layered and disguised. Think of a manager who needs to implement an unpopular new policy. Instead of just announcing it, they might first subtly introduce data suggesting its necessity, then maybe involve key influencers in its development, allowing them to discover the solution themselves, thus building buy-in through indirection.
And the source material itself, the 48 Laws of Power, is presented not as some rigid rule book, but as a dynamic handbook on the arts of indirection, end quote. The laws themselves aren't new inventions or the product of just one person's mind. They're distilled from writings spanning more than 3,000 years, drawing from ancient China and Renaissance Italy. End quote. The authors meticulously drew from this incredibly diverse array of figures, master strategists like Sun Tzu and Clausewitz, shrewd statesmen like Bismarck and Talleyrand, elegant courtiers like Castiglione and Gracian, legendary seducers like Dion de Lenclos and Casanova, and even master con artists like Yellow Kid Weil.
The premise derived from this vast historical survey is simple yet profound. Certain actions almost always increase one's power, the observance of the law, while others decrease it and even ruin us, the transgression of the law. Quote. These laws aren't just abstract theories, they're vividly illustrated by detailed historical examples, making them, as the source states, timeless and definitive. It reinforces the idea that true understanding comes from deep engagement with these patterns, not superficial observation. It highlights the serious, enduring nature of these dynamics, even when presented in an accessible or entertaining way. It underscores that these aren't mere historical curiosities, but living, breathing forces in human interaction today.
So for you, the listener, how can you best engage with this rich and, let's be honest, challenging material? The source suggests several distinct ways, each offering a different path to understanding. You could choose to read it straight through, cover to cover, for a general overview. See how the laws connect, how they might apply to your own life. This comprehensive reading helps you evaluate past actions with new eyes, maybe gain a sense of control. It often inspires a complete reevaluation of past experiences. Or, alternatively, you could browse it, almost like a tactical guide, looking for specific problems you might be facing, say, issues with a boss at work, or navigating a tough negotiation to quickly find relevant laws you might be breaking or observing.
And finally, yes, it can be approached simply for entertainment, for an enjoyable, enlightening ride through fascinating historical foibles and great deeds. But there's a very serious warning attached to this seemingly lighter approach. One the source doesn't mince words about. Power is endlessly seductive and deceptive in its own way. It is a labyrinth. Your mind becomes consumed with solving its infinite problems, and you soon realize how pleasantly lost you have become. In other words, it becomes most amusing by taking it seriously. The source advises us, quite strongly, not to be frivolous with this knowledge. Because the gods of power frown on the frivolous, they give ultimate satisfaction only to those who study and reflect, and punish those who skim the surfaces looking for a good time. This reinforces that true understanding comes from deep, serious engagement, not just superficial browsing.
And it leaves us with Machiavelli's potent quote once more from The Prince, a powerful, blunt reminder that ties all these threads together. Any man who tries to be good all the time is bound to come to ruin among the great number who are not good. Hence, a prince who wants to keep his authority must learn how not to be good and use that knowledge or refrain using it as necessity requires.
This profound statement brings us right back to the core lesson of this deep dive, I think. Understanding these dynamics isn't an endorsement of their moral implications. It's presented as a necessary step for effective navigation in a world where power dynamics are ever-present and inescapable. It's about seeing the world as it is, not as we might wish it were, and choosing to be skillful within that reality.
So we've taken a truly fascinating and, yeah, at times, definitely uncomfortable deep dive today into the underlying currents of power. We've explored the stark truth that the desire for power seems universal, fundamentally inescapable, even when modern society demands we cloak it in layers of politeness and perceived fairness. We've seen how the illusion of opting out is often just another, sometimes more cunning and deceptive, power play itself. And we've uncovered the essential toolkit for navigating this complex game, starting with that crucial foundation of emotional mastery, moving through objective thinking and strategic foresight, maybe even embracing the art of deception as a tool, and finally wielding the crucial shield of patience. And through it all, that constant, clear-eyed, almost amoral perspective that focuses on the tangible results of actions, rather than getting swayed by often misleading intentions. Understanding these intricate dynamics, we hope, truly allows you to be a more effective, more aware, and ultimately more secure individual. Whether you're negotiating a big professional deal, trying to influence a community project, or simply striving to be better understood by someone you care about.
It really forces us to confront the reality that while we laudably strive for an ideal world, one of pure collaboration, absolute transparency, we must also operate in a profoundly pragmatic one, where self-interest and influence are just constant factors. The insights from this deep dive compel us to look beneath the surface, to recognize those subtle currents of influence and control shaping our interactions every single day. And hopefully that allows us to respond with greater wisdom and effectiveness.
And as you, our listener, go about your week, we leave you with this thought to mull over. If the pursuit of power is truly a fundamental and inescapable human drive, And if modern society demands we cloak this drive in layers of apparent fairness and benevolence, well, what ethical frameworks, if any, can genuinely guide us in navigating this inherent duplicity? How do we do that without sacrificing our core values, our sense of self, or our ability to form genuine connections? And given that the game is the same across millennia, as the source suggests, what enduring human truths does this tell us about the nature of progress itself and our inherent capacity for both profound good and profound cunning?
Thank you for joining us on this deep dive into the enduring and often hidden dynamics of power.
Keep observing the world with this newfound perspective, and we'll see you on the next deep dive.